done stepped in the game? At point blank range, who done stepped in the game? At point blank range, who done stepped in the game? Stepped in the game, stepped in the game.
Who done stepped in the game? We're going to do this in two parts. So I'm going to get right to it and we'll go from there. I'm going to show you a little bit of info here that is kind of interesting, and we'll talk about everything we need to talk about at this point. So this tweet went around a very, very long time ago. So we're talking 2023, but even then it was a year late. So this is showing shipment information for the T239, right? So now that we know that it's confirmed that this is the processor that is in the SoC due to the screenshot from a long time ago, and then there's another video that we'll cover it later here that literally showed the board. They have access to the board and they're doing scans and stuff like that. Basically, they're beating out chipworks at this point. Now we know pretty much what's going on, and everything with the shipping manifest at that point is pretty much accurate, barring some information regarding whether they're test development devices or not. Obviously, these are tests; they're not final. Some shipments were for development, so they were basically the HAC version of the. Said that the HAC version, it was the HAT version for development for the Switch models. So those went out first, obviously, before the models that became retail were for. So some of the information on this may have been late at the time, but it would have been for the 2022 model and not the 2023 stuff that's been going around. Obviously, that stuff was getting ready for retail. But either way, this tweet went around and it became a whole thing. And then people started to get a hold of this information and were able to ping pong off of different data sets from shipping to figure out what exactly was going on here. So Family Boards has been following this stuff for quite a while. So they kind of like went through the entire process to figure out what exactly was there. And that's how we found out what type of UFS storage was there. And I say UFS storage and not NvMe, which some YouTubers were claiming was in this thing back then. And it requires too much power, and there's a waste of lanes if you put something like that in something that small. And you start to see some of the failures of that, like in devices such as the Steam Deck, where the TDP is just too high to use some of the benefits of that for faster storage. So one of the build rating here is clearly showing who's doing what. So the private company for NVIDIA Graphics Holdings is here. So you get to see the functional tests, PCA for T239, and along those lists for shippings gives you part numbers, and on those part numbers they tell you things such as the model for the type of flash storage is going to be on the system. So on the backboard there was a model, and I don't really have it right now, but I could pull it up later and put it in another link or something to that effect. But Kioxia, who is either planning to merge or is in the middle of merging with SK Hynix right now, they have their own modules that adhere to the JEDEC standard of UFS, and this specific version is UFS 3.1, and this version got ratified by JEDEC in 2020 or so, and the SoC from the latest scan in the video that we're going to talk about later, that was taped out around 2020 2021. So this was already in play. They had already done this. So by the time, basically around 2019 is when active development and final chip design was done for Switch 2 at this point, which is why I thought it was hilarious that people were talking about Switch Pro all the way up until like 2022. People were still talking about Switch Pro, and I'm like, that doesn't benefit Nintendo at all. You might as well move on to the next generation. And Nintendo typically does that after they release a new system anyway. They're not going to do that. If they were going to come up with a new model, it would have been what we saw, which was Switch OLED. You're like, hey, reuse the parts for the existing system as much as possible, so you can make some type of profit off of it, which they did. So we're looking at UFS 3.1, right? And some of the specs to it, they show you the pin count and stuff like that. But the only way to really get the specifications on it, because the JDEC standards, for whatever reason, are behind a paywall. They want you to pay almost $400 for the book to see their standards. But Samsung, who is not the component manufacturer of what's inside of the Switch 2 current day right now. I mean, Nintendo can change partners or use multiple partners as much as they want. But current state right now, these are the only people outside of Wikipedia that actually show you the write speed of these devices. So we're talking about 1200 megabytes per second for this device, or several hundred IOPS maximum, uh, with regards to how you're going to be able to interact as far as like transfers per second on this device. Now, while that is, I want to say, anywhere between 8 to 10 times slower than what would be in other NvMe devices, what I mentioned again is that power envelope and what you need for those PCIe lanes, and that's nothing to sneeze at that point. So with regard to per watt, how much storage you're getting and how many transfers per second you're getting per watt, this is a significant increase over the original eMMC storage that was in the Switch. Now, and in regard to how that's going to work for this next generation platform, because Switch 2 is starting its 10th generation of consoles, we're starting to see benefits even of the reckless third-party games that are around right now, because third-party games are bloated and they need all kind of things to fix all the problems that they introduced in the 7th generation. So with the games being bigger, they need to stream data instead of it all being in RAM, because there's not enough RAM for the platform. Well, the platform was in at the time. Then we came up with storage to do that, or instead of streaming directly from a disk, you had storage to temporarily hold it and then move it in a segmented way in a memory hierarchy. Then the storage for the drive became too slow, so we start coming up with things like, hey, well, why don't we have flash storage to move this a little bit faster? And now the flash storage is proving to be, it wasn't exactly the thing that it was going to be, because you have to segment your memory in a way, i.e. the way Mark Cerny said do it, or you won't see that many benefits, and you'll start to see a lot of games still have loading issues if they're not developed appropriately. And since games are bloated and they're kind of made with a PC target, and they kind of throw them on top of whatever platform as they go anyway, you run into these little issues where Series X of all platforms, you have load times that are starting to approach the times that there were on the original Xbox One, and that should not be a thing. So that being said, we're gonna go through some of the little things we're going to talk about here with regards to this chipset. So the T239, as I mentioned, was taped out around 2020, 2021 or so, right around the time, literally right after NVIDIA made their announcement that they're going to do Ampere next. Here, this article here that I should have had up here before for you guys, right? So this is in April of 2021. So this early in the game, NVIDIA obviously was talking to Nintendo at the time, and they had already said, hey, look, we're going to have this product for you, so work with us as we develop a successor for Maxwell, for the Maxwell SoC that's in Switch. And they've had a couple of things. They've had the Jetson Orin and Jetson Nano. There were a couple of products that they were kind of working on to perfect the SoC that they wanted to do for mobile going forward. And this is one of the chipsets. I think this is the original one that I saw here. So you have Ampere right here in 2020, which is what Nintendo was kind of working on. And then you had Ampere next. So that's kind of where Nintendo was talking about going. So you're talking about, this is Lovelace here, and this is Blackwell. So what ended up happening is Nintendo's thinking, hey, if you're giving us this roadmap here, then we're going to need a bridge between here and here, instruction set wise. So when I say that, and I mean that, that's not saying that, hey, we're putting a brand new GPU in here that's 3 generations newer and we're putting in the SoC. Obviously, number one, you got TDP requirements you have to worry about at that point, and you also have technology that isn't really available at the time as far as like drivers and stuff like that. So their thing was, hey, let's get it as close as we can. Let's do 1 + 1 here, and then we can start to add things here or there. So I'll get to the video. You'll see what I'm talking about here. But essentially, what Nintendo did was they kind of taped out the Ampere GPU part in this SoC with additional space, just like the SoC would be for Ampere Next, which ended up being Ada Lovelace. So the Ada Lovelace part that will go into Jetson Orin or something to that effect or whatever ended up getting taped out with both pieces in here. And what that leads me to believe is if those SMs are taped out in a way that's more close to this, that means the shader model and the shader logic and the wavefront organization and whatnot is going to be around this. It's going to be both of these together. So that would mean that essentially you'll have an Ampere GPU with Lovelace instructions. So better shaders here or there, features that maybe, let's say, a version of DLSS that's a little bit better than what originally shipped with Ampere, or different ways to process shader logic. All that kind of stuff is happening that's going to be different and a little bit more advanced, or what we're not going to expect compared to, say, like a regular Ampere GPU or any like laptop variant or whatnot of a 30 series GPU. It basically what's happening is, as with other platforms that Nintendo has developed here, this is completely custom. The closest to off the shelf we've ever had with Nintendo was Switch, and even that was custom with regards to how it boots, what it controls, and things of that nature. You can't do exactly what you would do with any regular Tegra X1 than you would with the Nintendo Switch. There's other operands and stuff like that, and Nintendo owns the entire hypervisor and the kernel, which is something that you can't just jump in and start hacking and doing whatever you want to do from there. This is custom, as in nobody's ever seen this and nobody knows how it's going to perform, which is why it's surprising people so much. I kind of warned people ahead of time saying, hey, look, I, Nintendo is with them doing the upscaling and whatnot. Now we're going to have a problem because now you can't look at the numbers and then say, whoa, it's way better over here, when the end result is looking exactly like the thing that you're championing. So if you're saying, hey, well, Nintendo doesn't fit in because these other platforms are doing this thing, and then the end result is this thing, it doesn't matter what the numbers are in between. If this platform is only anywhere between 1.5 to 3 teraflops and is competing against a system that has over double that, then what are we talking about at this point? Because if the end result is the same due to upscaling and whatever techniques, or the fact that it doesn't even have to draw as high as a frame buffer because it's not targeting 4K as much as these other platforms will, now you're in a situation where these look the same. So you end up with Digital Foundry and other people having to correct their own statements, thinking that DLSS isn't being implemented, or we don't think this is that version of this game, or we don't really know where we're going to go with this because we don't think that the Switch 2 will be there. And then you see footage of Cyberpunk working just fine on the platform, working straight off of a cartridge. And now we're in an uncharted scenario where there's no true, a game isn't a benchmark and it never was, but there's no one game you can pinpoint to say, oh well, that's going to have trouble. They're trying to talk about this Star Wars game and GTA 6 and say, hey, well, you know what, this is going to be the benchmark kind of thing. Games are drawn per frame, and if Switch is not drawing that big of a frame buffer as the other platforms are, and Switch 2 isn't, then that kind of like nixes it, because resolution is the greatest impact on performance. Worst case scenario, now you gotta Switch 2 game at 1440p instead of 4K. Who really cares? Especially if you can upscale from that too. On top of that, now we're coming to a point where the resulting image is going to be a wash. So really, the only way now we're going to be in the Xbox and PlayStation fight now, to where it's going to be where the only reason you can tell which version is better is because Digital Foundry or somebody else told you so, or you have a frame rate test and one version skipped a frame or something to that effect. Now, when you get that granular, the layman, the majority of people that buy video games that aren't us, they don't care, and they're just gonna buy the platform they want to buy, and they'll have all the games. And you're gonna start having this thing where the people that are the tech heads are gonna, or the fake tech heads anyway, they're gonna start being upset because their favorite version of the game that they want to buy, other people aren't. And it's going to end up being a scenario where, hey, I thought we were playing Call of Duty, blah blah blah. Well, I'm not playing on PlayStation no more. I'm playing on Switch 2 or whatever. And now they're going to start taking to the airwaves and having like little minor meltdowns. It's going to end up happening because this platform is a successor to probably the best-selling console of all time. It's getting really close. It's at almost 153 million right now, and the Switch One still has a ways to go. It's going to stay on the market for at least another year. So it's probably going to be out the PS2. And that being said, like the successor is probably going to be at least moderately successful. And by moderately successful, I mean it's going to sell over half, at least over half what the original Switch did, which is still really good. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want this platform, and they're going to buy these games, whatever they are, be a third party or what have you. They're going to be buying these versions of games now, and it's going to be weird to see the people that were coming up with excuses to make Steam Deck look good, then in the same breath still say the Switch 2 version is bad because the Switch 2 version runs better than the Steam Deck. It's crazy stuff. But anyways, I'm gonna leave this here for a minute, and let me bring up the video here, and we're gonna go through this so I can talk to you guys about it real quick.
Right here is the motherboard of a Nintendo Switch 2. Hard to believe, right? I mean, the console itself isn't even on the shelf yet, so how did we get our hands on this board? Well, it all thanks to Xianyu, which is basically Chinese eBay. At first, we thought that was just kind of, parody, but then we zoomed in on the photos, and according to the double Type-C port and the package of the CPU, holy.
So as you can see here, these are pretty much like for like the same here. It's probably exactly the same with the exception of the exact stepping being on there. And as you can see, they kind of edited it out because they didn't want the full stepping to be on there, because then they could be found based on the stepping that they have, because the stepping usually is part of the date and the series that they were printed. And if they could find that, then they could find out who had it. And it's a whole thing because this is the development board and nobody else should have been able to get access to it. But I'm looking here, it's looking like this is that exact same board from the original leak. And they just have another version of it that they bought off the eBay or what have you that they got a hold to. So, but it's clearly the same. It's clearly the same chip. If you look there, it's all the pins are the same, and they're going to take. I guess they're going to take the IHS off of it, and we'll see from there. But it's looking like the exact same model number to me. SNW8VF. Yeah, that's what it's looking like here, and it may be a little bit different on the left there. It looks like that's a different thing, but then again, it might have changed. It might have changed positions here, but yeah, this is an NVIDIA chipset here. I mean, this is the guy. So this is the Ampere / Lovelace love letter here. So we'll see what's going on. But you can see the other chips here, and if you look at the models, kind of like of what's on here for the SK Hynix here, that is the Corsair. I can't the name of the company. I don't know how you spell that, but that is the Kioxa. They have some type of merger going on with SK Hynix, but that's how the flash storage is going to be for this system. So let me get back into it.
Holy cow, that is the real deal. And we just bought this Switch 2 motherboard for about 150 bucks. I actually tried to power it up, but unfortunately it didn't boot at all. So I'm not sure if it's damaged or missing parts or just an unfinished sample straight from the factory. Either way, we obviously can't build a full Switch 2 out of it, let alone play any games on it. But what we can do is to reverse engineer this NVIDIA chip on Switch 2. We can use a microscope or grind it down to get a die shot and figure out exactly what kind of hardware the Switch 2 is packing, how many CPU cores, what's the GPU spec. We will find out very soon. On top of that, we can send it in for FibSam analysis to check whether it's built on Samsung's 8nm or 5nm process. And if that is not enough, we'll also benchmark a laptop GPU with similar specs to estimate the performance of the Switch 2.
I'm going to tell you why that's a bad idea. So you're trying to say, hey, look, we have this other low wattage part here, right? And it's just the GPU part. See, the thing about this is one system. It's one entire LSI. So you have the CPU and the GPU in a single package, and they're tightly interwoven and talking to each other. They're sharing the exact same memory pool. So there's no latency with regards to getting results back from the CPU and vice versa. The same thing with storage, which is also on the same lanes here for UFS. So whereas on this laptop, you're going to have a lot of latency for things going back and forth, right? You're going to get weird performance and you're going to say, hey, look, well, this probably won't run that good. Well, it's not, because it's an unoptimized PC. This is a tightly woven piece of fabric here that we have for the Switch 2. So you could do a lot of heavy lifting can be done with this thing. Not even just saying, hey, well, look, where it's custom and we're building custom software for it. It's just the fact that the system itself and the way the firmware talks to itself is going to be way better than this generic laptop here. So things such as boot and init, like all that kind of stuff is just going to be way faster because everything is expected and there's no changes. So every Switch 2 motherboard that's made, everything is the same. Everything is designed to work and interact with each other as fast as possible. Whereas this laptop is made more modular because there's going to be different configurations of the laptop. So it's not expecting the exact same CPU, the exact same GPU, the exact same memory, or anything like that in each and every one of this chassis right here this laptop has. So it's kind of a flawed comparison from the jump anyway, but let's follow along with their logic and see where they go with this.
Anyway, let's dive into the heart of the Nintendo Switch 2. First thing first, let's compare Switch 2's motherboard with OG Switch and Switch OLEDs. And it immediately pops out in terms of its size, not only because Switch 2 is physically getting bigger, but Nintendo also eliminated the daughter board design of the cartridge slot and integrated it into the main board. To be fair, this is definitely not on the high density side when it comes to PCB's integration level. But let's take a look at the main components we have here. On the flip side, there's Hynix 256 gigs, TLC UFS 3.1 storage, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth from MediaTek, Realtek Audio, plus a two-phase PMIC powering the SoC, pumping up to 34.4 watts of power. But don't worry, the Switch 2's SoC itself probably slips way less than that. Back to the front, the PCB stamped week 36, 2024, and here's DRAMs around the SoC. Two 6 gigs Hynix LPDDR5X chips round up a total of 12 gigs of RAMs. One 28-bit wide, rated at 8533 mega transfer per second. But it will almost certainly be downclocked by Nintendo as usual. And here in the middle is our rockstar, the SoC from NVIDIA. A massive 207 square millimeter die, nearly double the size of a Tegra X1 from the OG Switch, let alone the smaller variants from the Switch OLED. In comparison, we got our RTX 3050 Ti's GA107, AMD's Ryzen 7840H, Apple M2, and Qualcomm's X Elite. And
so for a while, people thought that the Switch Pro was going to be developed as well, because the Switch development units, the HATs, their SoC was 200 millimeters squared because they doubled the clock speeds, and the RAM was doubled also to 6 gigs of RAM for that system setup. And so when people saw that, they were thinking, "Oh, well, Nintendo's working on the next thing." And I'm like, "No, not then at the time. This is 2016 when we saw this information. So obviously nothing had been taped out at that point." So it, with regards to the SoC size, yes, it's bigger. And I'm going to point to one other thing too, is that there was a lot of back and forth with regards to whether this is 5 nanometer or 8 nanometer. It turns out it's actually NVIDIA 8N, which is really close to 10 nanometers. It's a weird thing where it's kind of like half and half. I knew that this was going to be at least 8 nanometers by default because of the type of CPU that's in here. The A78C is 8 nanometers, so it can't be any smaller than that unless there's an advance to the Cortex CPU, which I kind of had a feeling it wasn't going to be because Orin hasn't been die shrunk yet. So unless you're moving on to a newer version of the Cortex CPU, then this wasn't going to be a thing. There was no way that they can get it to 5 nanometers without some real big advances in technology. So when I saw there were talks about the 5 nanometer stuff, I shrugged my shoulders on that one because I was saying prepare for disappointment. But then again, I really don't understand the hang up on people just being so woven tightly on production size that really has no impact on performance per se. It just means you have a more dense SoC, and that could be good or it could be bad, depending on how the gates are designed and how efficient the resulting SoC is. Typically speaking, with Moore's Law, yeah, you're probably going to get a more efficient chip. Depending if there are leaks, there could be bad gates, there could be anything regarding this. So smaller being better isn't always the case. It's what's better tested is the thing. So as we move on with this, you'll see kind of some of the choice decisions that Nintendo made with this.
Switch 2's die size is bigger than any of them above. But I have to remind you, bigger doesn't mean beefier. Because the size largely depends on the fabrication process, on the transistor density, let's say. As the part number suggests, the chip is called GMLX30 Rev A1. It's from Samsung's fabrication and packaged on week 21, 2024 in Taiwan. And now it's time to decap the chip and dig a bit further. We first use a metallurgical microscope to peek at the metal layers, because you'll often find some marks from the makers up there. And we instantly spotted NVIDIA's stamp. Well, the Switch 2's chip really is called T239. I swear I saw that rumor during COVID time, and today we finally got it proved. As you can see, T239 isn't exactly a new chip. It got taped out back in 2021. For comparison, we also decapped a GA107 taped out in 2020 and released in 2021, a typical 1-year gap. So the 4-year gap for the T239 is certainly quite long. And it kind of backs up the whisper that Switch 2 was supposed to launch earlier, but got pushed to 2025.
So they're talking about the rumors and whatnot based on the time frame. People don't understand that Nintendo is cheap. They want to wait until yields are as cheap as possible for them to mass reproduce. And if it was really expensive then at the time, they weren't going to do that. They're not going to do, hey, this brand new SoC that we have right now in 2021, let's print them all out right now. Like that would cost several $1,000,000 per 100,000 more than what they needed to be. So if you can get them as cheaply as possible, or you can stash all the yields as quickly as possible, or it ends up being cheaper over time because your yields are more productive instead of rushing them all out and having a lot of failures, you don't have to do Nintendo Switch 2S like Microsoft has to do to make up for the Xbox Series X being binned. So if you spend your time on production, you can stack a lot of these, which is supposedly what Nintendo did in Vietnam for all the ones that are coming to the US. So there's no telling how long Nintendo had been stacking these. So when in production, they might have had production issues. They might have had other issues as far as like tariffs and stuff like that. And they're able to stage these to get around and do what they need to do. It's more than just the technology and rush out the door. There's a wealth of other things with regards to production, logistics, and things of that nature to get something out of the door in a in a way where you're not losing a crap ton of money. You spend what you need to do on R&D, you stage stuff where you need to, and you account for how you're going to get your money back at retail. So if that takes, several years of planning or in marketing or whatever to get what you need to get done, that's what you end up doing. But we'll move forward here and try to figure out what else we can find out with this. But yeah, sometimes people don't understand the whole picture.
And now let's grind the chip and see what's inside. This is a die shot of a T239. To be honest with you, the layout looks quite messy comparing to other Tegra chips like O-ring. What you can definitely spot here for now might only be the CPU cores, GPU cores, and memory controllers. So this is the octa-core A78C CPU cluster on T239.
Note that there's still a whole bunch of stuff that is unidentified here. Like you can see the SRAM blocks for the CPU, the really big SRAM blocks for the GPU, and then there's memory controllers, other pinouts and stuff like that. But there's other custom logic on this chip that does things that you won't need shaders for. There's probably other smaller, how can I say this, fixed function things that would do stuff that tensor cores would do. So these are the other things that I'm talking about. Like people still don't know what some of the SRAM blocks are for on Wii U. To this day, like the scans have been there for years, and people can't identify all of it. So I don't know. I would just say that these people are really smart and they know what they're doing. And the way that they design their firmware is going to dance around all of this and make sure it works well. So
we got 4 megabytes of shared level 3 cache in the middle, and each core has its individual 256K level 2 cache.
I'll say this as well. The L1 is double that of the Series S and PlayStation 5 and Series X. The same thing for L2 and the L3 that's shared as well. Yes, that's also bigger than the other platforms. So when they tell you that, hey, these CPUs are not as performant, you kind of look at other things too. Hey, this CPU does a whole bunch in one clock or whatever, right? Well, if this 878C, this core 0 over here on the top left, can be done with its task in a fraction of the time that the longer processes are for the Zen 2s, then is it really faster at that point? What are we doing within the 1.2 gigahertz of this chip versus the 2 gigahertz of the others? So, and that's the other thing that we're talking about here. And when they talk about performance, it's usually going to be taped around SIMD instructions and a lot of stuff here. These chips don't have to do all of that because it's designed with heterogeneous compute with CUDA. So anything that's really, really SIMD heavy, or they call it CPU bound or CPU heavy or anything like, is really not. You send that to the GPU core for parallel processing, send a result back, dedicate one of these cores to process back results from the GPU, and you're just as fast as any other platform. This is the type of conversations I have with people, and then they don't want to have the conversation anymore on Twitter or whatever, blah, blah, blah. They're just like, well, look at the numbers. And I'm like, well, do you understand the numbers? Do you understand what they're trying to do? Do you understand why they made this as quote unquote slow as it is? Like, they have other things in mind. And if the GPU is already running hot as it is all the time, and tensor cores are being used and stuff like that, who's to say that you don't use a tensor core to process other SRAM information? It's already being used now for the streaming that you're going to see on game chat for Switch. They're not using any of the SRAM modules in its traditional GPU layout. That way, they're using the tensor cores. So these are the things that I'm talking about here, and I'm pretty sure a lot of it's gonna go over like his heads, but I'm really trying to get those videos. It just bothers me certain things that they leave out when I talk about stuff like this.
Within, funny enough, a single A78C core on the T239 is exactly the same size as the A78AE core on O-ring, which uses Samsung's 8nm process. So yeah, that definitely hints something, I guess. For comparison, we've listed other A78-based CPUs and their per-core areas, and there's no way T239 is on Samsung's 5nm at least. Surrounding the CPU is the GPU cores. An Ampere design borrowed from NVIDIA's RTX 30 series. It packs 6 TPCs, each with 2 SMs of 128 CUDA cores. At total, we got 1536 CUDA cores. Well, the leaks were right again, but the GPU of T239 is oddly laid out. 2 of its TPCs sits apart from the other 4, a rare design from NVIDIA. And judging from the layout, it actually looks way closer to the newer Ada architecture on 40 series card rather than Ampere, just like its brother Oring's GPU. NVIDIA themselves insist that Oring uses Ampere GPUs, so literally T239 should be using Ampere as well. And we also checked the size of GPU cores. Funny enough, each SM on T239 is 22% smaller than the one on Oring, yet both are larger than the single SM on the RTX 3090's GA102. Assuming they are using the same process node, my guess is that this Ampere might not be your typical Ampere. Okay, now let's talk about the process node. The die shot already hinted a lot of things, but we still need some hard proof, so we sent this T239 to FibStem. Even better, FibStem, the ultimate way to judge process node. With that, we can see each and every transistor of the chip, which is just fascinating. We compared T239 to its desktop brother GA107, which NVIDIA said is using Samsung's 8N node. The bottom line is, these two chips are quite similar, but not exactly identical. The giveaway is the gate pitch. GA107 shows both 64nm and 68nm pitches, spot on Samsung's 8nm spec, whereas T239 only measures 68nm. It actually matches Samsung's 10nm spec. But some of the other aspects do line up with 8nm. In fact, the GA107 also shows mixed character of 8nm and 10nm from Samsung. So here's the scoop. NVIDIA's so-called 8N is a custom Samsung node based on 10nm with a handful of 8nm tweaks. Nevertheless, 8 and 10 share a lot under the hood, and NVIDIA will probably just call T239 an 8N chip, but it really is a 10nm and 8nm hybrid. Alright, everything we've seen so far lines up with the leaked T239 specs. I mean, when it comes to Nintendo and NVIDIA, they're not exactly masters of secrecy, are they? Anyway, since we now kind of know the actual specs of T239, we can probably guesstimate Switch 2's performance, based on the clock speed that leaked a few months ago. So first off, GPU performance.
There's absolutely no way for them to be able to tell that based on just them scanning it. They won't know the clock speeds unless they know the voltages that are being sent to the GPU and the CPU. And they don't know that until they know whatever functions are inside of the firmware, which is maybe if they're able to pull the data from the ROM would tell them what the firmware settings are, but that's the only way to really tell exactly what these things are once you power them on. That's why they don't know anything, because they can't power it up. It'd be kind of hard for them to be able to gain the information from this. So they're just going to play a guessing game here. While we've seen these specs floating around, having the CPU be lower in docked mode is strange, really strange scenario here. But Nintendo does things in a very, very untraditional way, because they're thinking about, hey, what are the sustained speeds per clock? What's the memory clock and how is the timing on that? They did very weird things with regards to GameCube and Wii, timing those speeds together as well, because they want to make sure that as a memory cell reflashes, the CPU is getting its result and the next CPU cycle starts. That's kind of the real weird type math that Nintendo CPU engineers do. And if they had any hands in how this 878C was being developed for them, something weird like this doesn't surprise me with regards to that. So, but we'll see exactly how this goes.
The closest thing to match T239 on PC is a massively downclocked RTX 2050, a laptop GPU based on Ampere's GA107 with 2048 CUDA cores. It's like a 3050 but with a 64-bit memory bus, thus much lower bandwidth, similar to Switch 2. In order to mimic T239, we have to downclock the 2050 from its original 1600 MHz to 755 MHz for dock mode, and all the way.
I'm disagreeing with this so bad because there's such a big difference between having a memory bus of 64-bit versus 128-bit. Playing around with the clocks isn't going to get you anything because all the timings are going to be off now based on the memory bus. I don't know why they're doing this. Just to, I guess, get as close as possible to what the estimated performance would be in CUDA, but it doesn't matter because this is a different shader language anyway. So there's going to be different advantages versus a 2050 and what's inside of Switch 2. So what are we doing here? You're trying to see how bad Switch 2 can handle older shader models older than 8.5, CUDA model 8.5. Like what are we even doing here? 8.0? Like what does that even mean? Because as soon as the shader model is updated and the language is updated and the memory bus is updated, you're going to get advantages. There's no way around this. So I don't know why you would take an older mobile model and do this. The best thing to do if you were going to do this is take a newer mobile model and try to tie it to that, but then the clocks wouldn't be anywhere close to the same. So this is one of those biases where you start dealing with clocks instead of the memory bus and the rest of the configuration and trying to marry all that up. You should start with whatever the fastest or the how can I say this, the clearest advantage to logic is. And that's going to be, hey, are the SRAM blocks the same? And if they're not the same, what are we even doing at that point? Match the SRAM blocks, then match the frequency, then match the memory bus, then match the frequency. And then you figure out how many shaders, how many CUDA shaders and whatnot you need in between each one to match one from the other. We're comparing two completely different sets of logic. Like the wavefronts don't even operate the same on this GPU. And we're going to somehow force fit it to see what we can get from this. And then this result is probably going to be really bad. And even if it is, the thing about it is, if it's really bad and they end up with good results, which I got a strange feeling they will, it's all that means is just Switch 2 is going to be significantly better than whatever they come up with. So, all right, here we go.
Down to 421 MHz for handheld. And we had to turn down the memory clocks as well. That is no easy feat because NVIDIA enforces minimum clock limits in OC tools like MSI Afterburner. So I turned to my friends at NVIDIA to help me out, and we used some internal tools to achieve the impossible clock speed. Even then, handheld mode at 421 MHz is still tricky, so I decided to just cut the TGP to about 17 to 19 watts, and at least we can get closer to the clocks we want. I also dropped some mem clocks by changing the P state. Well, we still can't quite hit the leaked bandwidth for handheld, but this is as close as we can get to a Switch 2 simulation. Let's kick off with GPU benchmarks from 3D Mark, still known as Lite. So the performance of Switch 2 stands here and here. Comparing to desktop graphics cards, Switch 2 in dock mode performs roughly like a GTX 1050 Ti, plus DLSS and ray tracing, of course. To be honest, if you compare...
So check this out. People, as we speak right now, are on social media sharing this and using this as evidence to say what the system is capable of at this point. I want you to see how broken the information is to get this simulation done, and just know by default Switch 2 is significantly better than anything that came up from here, right? And this is what people are using to say where this platform is. On the CPU side, that's probably really, really close because this system was never designed to be high CPU. But on the GPU end, a lot of that wattage for Nintendo to say, hey, we're going up to 45 watts docked, they're putting a lot of emphasis on a GPU grunt here. And with it being a newer shader language now, it's going to be a lot better than what's anticipated here. But I want you guys to see this because chances are you probably already saw it on social media, and I would just say these are bullshots right now.
Compare it to some mobile chips, this T239 is still quite capable. For example, in dock mode, it's faster than the A18 Pro on iPhone, and faster than the legendary Apple M1, but it lags behind Snapdragon's 8 Elite and AMD's 780M iGPU. Some of you might be curious how it stacks up with the Xbox Series S, but that is really in a different league, let's say. And if you add PS5 and RTX 3060 to the competition, they are basically 4 times of Switch 2 in dock mode. And for handheld mode, Switch 2 is basically a GTX 750 Ti.
I'm gonna say this too. Even if this is accurate, which it is not, right? The goal is for Switch 2 to be 4x less in terms of wattage, which means that it's going to be 4x less of performance and clock speed and things of that nature, right? It's supposed to be able to do that and still give you the same result, which is why people are confused when they're seeing some of these screenshots now and some of these video comparisons. It's really there because Switch 2 isn't really going to be, especially in third-party games, it's not out here trying to push all these games in 4K, if you will, right? And if you're shooting for 1080p, you don't need any of this, which means that if you're running these games at 1080p, if you will, and you're competing with a Series S or a Series X or what have you, I don't know what to tell you. Like at this point, other than the Series S might be maybe 40% faster on the GPU end than Switch 2, but it's also consuming way more power than Switch 2. So your power bill is way greater for the same 1080p and maybe let's say twice the FPS or whatever in insert game here. And a lot of the times with the advances in technology, especially with DLSS and having a newer CPU and newer GPU, that might be a wash anyway. So there's just a lot of wasted wattage on the floor here. And I think this is the same comparison we had with Switch and PS4 back in the day. And it's just really strange, man. Once people start writing these games for these platforms, it's going to be different than you think it is. You're thinking about raw horsepower. Raw old horsepower doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter how much grunt is in this GTX 1050 right here. It's a 1050. The shader language is old, and newer stuff dances circles around it with way less wattage. So, yeah, well, it's just funny to me, man. But continue.
It's quite close to a Steam Deck, even a bit faster than the PS4. And if you compare T239 to its predecessor Tegra X1 on the OG Switch, it is indeed a huge leap in GPU performance. You're looking at roughly a 7x boost in dock mode and about 7.5x in handheld. It is impressive, but it's not the 10x NVIDIA has been claiming. I think they probably included DLSS games in that 10x number. Typical NVIDIA move, right? And don't get me
them saying that those Tensor cores and those RX cores being in there, being part of the 10X, even if that's accurate as he says, that's the thing that's also not being accounted for in these comparisons as well. That's literally a night and day difference. So never mind.
wrong, having DLSS is indeed fantastic for Switch 2. It can really shoulder a large part of the graphics burden. That being said, we are still not 100% sure if the leaked clock speed is actually true, so there are still mysteries to uncover. Now let's try some games for the sake of simulation. Cyberpunk 2077 is going to launch on day 1 for Switch 2, and CDPR has already partially confirmed the graphic targets, so let's see how it might actually look like. This is the simulation of docked quality mode. With DLSS quality CNN model, we're getting 30 FPS at low preset 1080p, so it's 720p rendering. But it might sound a little bit mediocre, but it actually looks pretty decent and clear, right? And remember, the real Switch 2 version will be using dynamic res, so it can only be even better than this. And this is how docked performance mode looks like. Still 1080p output I'm using DLSS performance, so it runs at 40 FPS with 540p rendering. Then handheld quality mode is basically the same graphics with a 30 FPS target. And finally, handheld performance mode. This is the one I'm quite concerned about. 720p output DLSS performance, so it's only 360p rendering, targeted at 40 FPS. Well, what do you think of the graphics? It's obviously quite blurry for me, but somehow still playable on the portable screen. And I have to say, DLSS really saves the day here. I've never used a DLSS under such a low resolution before, but it just works unbelievably well. Of course, all of this is based on our PC simulation, and the real Switch 2 build will get further engine-level optimization, so just keep that in mind. We also tried Black Myth Wukong on our Switch 2 counterpart, and it actually runs okay, at least in docked mode. We're hitting 30 FPS with 1080p low preset DLSS balanced. Even in some high pressure thing like the opening here, we can get a pretty playable experience. But the graphics will hit hard if you want higher frame rates. You can get around 40 FPS with DLSS Ultra performance, but it looks like trash. And it does get even harder by switching to handheld, 720p low with DLSS Ultra performance. We're not even getting 30 here. I guess a Switch 2 port of Black Myth Wukong is technically possible, but the devs will have tons of work to do before it can really shine on this hardware. And speaking of possibility, do you know what is not possible for Switch 2? Well, it's Monster Hunter Wilds. We're not even getting 30 FPS in dock mode, 720p low with DLSS Ultra performance. Just look at the graphics. Damn, this should be illegal. And not to mention the handheld.
Monster Hunter Wilds was not built with Switch or Switch 2 in mind. They already have an engine for that. That's the Monster Hunter Rise engine. So if Monster Hunter Wilds can be ported to the Monster Hunter Rise engine, everything that you see in front of you right now, which is woefully, how can I say this, unoptimized, it won't be an issue. So, and as other developers have said, if you had experience with Switch development, jumping into Switch 2 development is second nature. So I will say this, I'll just say this right now. If Monster Hunter Wilds comes to Switch 2, it definitely won't look like this. It'll be significantly better than this. And by significantly better, I mean it will be a 1080p version of whatever is happening on PS5 right now in 4K. That's what you're going to see. Possibly in your hand. It may be a little bit lower than 1080p, but depending on what Capcom does, it'll be really hard for this game to not look impressive in your hand. So this is just a really, really bad comparison. And all it's doing is drawing a lot of negative attention for, you know, whatever they're trying to sell, I guess at this point, whoever their target audience is. The same reason that at the time of the recording of this video, I found it odd that the majority of gaming press, including Digital Foundry, they're part of Gaming Press now, they avoid comparing this system with PlayStation 5 and Series X. Instead, they want to compare it with the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro for some weird reason. Especially when it's really strange because you have PS5 versions of the game. You had no problem comparing the PS5 version of Mortal Kombat 1 to Mortal Kombat 1 on Switch. So why wouldn't you compare Street Fighter 4 or Final Fantasy 7 Remake on PS5 versus Switch 2? You know, these are the things because the average person won't be able to tell the difference, and they don't want you to know that. They want you to compare it. Hey, it's around PS4 thing, but this PS5 thing is the thing that you should get. Don't ever think that the Nintendo thing is really close or better in some cases, depending, because it's a newer technology. I really saw that, and that was weird to me, but yeah.
Mode, I don't even think it's worth saving. But lucky enough, there are better optimized AAA titles out there. For example, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 runs at 1080p medium setting DLSS performance in dock mode simulation. And we got a smooth 30 to 40 FPS. Handheld runs at 720p medium with DLSS performance, and it can also reach 30 FPS. And online games like Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, and Warzone 2.0 can also have a chance to get a Switch 2 port with solid performance. I'm talking about over 50 FPS at 1080p low with DLSS Ultra performance in dock mode, and over 40 FPS at 720p DLSS Ultra in handheld. Alright, so by now you got a rough idea of what the T239's GPU can do. But what about its CPU? It's packing 8 A78C cores and Octa Prime Core CPU, which on paper sounds way beefier than most smartphones out there. The downside is that it only clocks up to 1.1 GHz, and even lower in dock mode according to the leak. So what kind of CPU performance are we really looking at? To find out, we grabbed an O-Ring NX dev board, one of NVIDIA's siblings to the T239, and locked its 8 Cortex A78 AE cores down to exactly 1.1 GHz and 1 GHz. Running Geekbench 6, the results were underwhelming, let's put it that way. Compared to its GPU's not bad showing, the Switch 2 CPU just can't keep up. It only delivers about 66% of Steam Deck's multi-core score, and that's against the 4-core Zen 2 chip that's already only half the size of a PS5 CPU. The Switch 2 actually lands closer to something like a 10-year-old laptop Haswell i7. If you compare it to mobile CPUs, it's somewhere between a Snapdragon 855 and an Apple A12. That definitely sounds a bit mediocre for 2025. But compared to the Tegra X1 of OG Switch or the PS4's Jaguar CPUs, this is still a massive leap, roughly 6 times the performance over the last gen.
So let me say this: nothing on this list, with the exception of Tegra X1, has CUDA. None of them have what this Jetson NX, which for all intents and purposes is not going to do what the Switch 2 does because of other things that are natively built into some of the instructions that Nintendo is putting on here. None of them are going to be able to talk directly to the GPU in the same manner. They won't have the same advantages, and they won't be able to pass back large SIMD blocks of instructions back to the CPU as fast or as capable as these 8 CPUs will. That's one of the things where a lot of the times the parts don't always equal the whole. And there's a reason why Nintendo chose to do this, which is the same reason why the PS5 doesn't have a desktop CPU in it. It's a tablet CPU, even though it has this score of 7476 on here. What they won't do is show you the rest of the top of this list as far as CPU performance, because there's other CPUs on here that are in the 20,000s for Geekbench 6. And comparatively, it's really, really weak. But the GPU is what saves the PS5 because it's really, really high on GPU. So it's like a mid-range GPU from that time in 2020. So, but the reason why you do that is you have a low clocked CPU with, 8 cores or so, 16 if you do SMT, but that takes clock speed and some of the cache away. But if you have heavy GPU compute, you can do a lot of great things. And since this system is designed not only with heterogeneous compute in mind, it also has the better variant of heterogeneous compute with CUDA versus OpenCL. There's things you could do to have those quote unquote weak CPUs talk to a SIMD engine that's way stronger. Even though Neon is way more advanced than anything of the original, say like PS4 or anything like that, as far as SIMD instructions on a CPU, when you could pass it to the GPU and have it back in a fraction of a second, that's even better. So whether or not Nintendo already has this engine in place, I'm pretty sure they do, is up in the air. But it would be really strange if they didn't have a way to do heterogeneous compute here to get over this quote unquote hurdle, if you will. So, but that's what I want to talk to people about. Like, these are things that also aren't really being said like that. So, and I also want you to look also, these are the multi-core scores. Not too much of a difference in the CPU scores here. I don't know if you noticed. The highest CPU single CPU score is actually the Apple A12. That's what they don't tell you here. And that's interesting how the focus was away from that. So if you look at the T239, it's half of the A12, right? And it's about half of the PS5 on single core. So for each core per core, it's about half. It's about half. So if it's about half and you have the GPU to help out, depending on what the task is, it might be a wash. We'll see. These are the things that I talk about here. And look at the way that they use the information. So, all right.
So yes, it's not breaking any speed records in 2025, but it's still a serious upgrade over its predecessors. Originally, I was a bit worried that the Switch 2 CPU would be too weak, so I decided to simulate it on my PC. I took an Intel i7 10700KF, an 8-core CPU, downclocked to 1.4 GHz with hyperthreading disabled. This is a faithful reproduction of the T239 CPU performance. But when I actually fired some games, I realized this supposed to be terrible CPU was stronger than I expected. Even the completely unoptimized PC build of Cyberpunk 2077 managed a solid 30 to 40 FPS of CPU frames. Sure, you'll get occasional stutters or frame drops, but on console that's far easier to smooth out. And it gets even better with Black Myth Wukong. On the same chip, it still cranks out 40 to 50 FPS of CPU frames. With T239's graphics power, the CPU might not even be the bottleneck here.
Interesting. But notice all the focus on the CPU and talking about how weak it was. And notice what I said about the difference in single performance score. It's not really that big. And if you're talking about a system that's supposed to be 100% all the time, if you look at the charts up here, they show you the CPU usage, anything like that. Anytime you have idles, if there's a CPU core that's showing 0, you're wasting cores and you're wasting time. So the whole goal of a truly efficient system is to make sure all these are filled with instructions all the time. Same thing for your GPU cores as well, and your tensor cores and whatnot. With all of that there, and there's probably custom logic on the tensor cores too that they put in the SDK as well to help out with the CPUs. It's not going to matter. And the majority of these games are going to be GPU bound and not CPU bound. The CPU bound games are going to be the large open world games with a lot of NPCs all at one time. And even then, usually the high CPU areas are sectioned off from the rest of the game. So in that, there'll be one big metropolis area or something like that with a lot going on, and that'll be high CPU or what have you. And still you end up with results that are favorable. So now we sit and we see exactly what the deal is when you get to the nitty gritty here. And it's just weird to me. Just imagine now, this is an unoptimized PC build that he intentionally downclocked to make it severely hampered compared to what it would be on a customized SoC with its own drivers that it doesn't have to sift through like this PC will. And you still get these good results. So I just want y'all to understand that as we go through this. So you'll get my summary in just a minute here.
And if you've got a studio with ninja-level optimization chops like id Software, their Doom Eternal will hit a buttery smooth 120 FPS on that crappy CPU, fully leveraging a 120Hz display. I also simulate this performance on mobile using a Dimensity 8400 downclocked to 1 GHz. And you know what? Many mobile titles might as well struggle a bit with this type of CPU performance. Genshin Impact runs around 30 to 40 FPS in the worst thing, and Wuthering Wave mostly hovers in the same range but drops into the low 20s in combat. So now you know the kind of monsters smartphone makers are up against. Like I said, don't worry too much about the CPU, since Switch 2 as a console only have one type of CPU. Developers has a very clear target, and they can squeeze out huge gains by optimizing driver overhead or other things.
See what I mean?
Our PC and mobile tests just couldn't reflect what a console build can do. In comparison, GPU optimization is definitely more painful because performance gains usually means sacrificing visual fidelity. Even with techniques like super resolution, you still need raw power to make magic happen. And that's why a lot of consoles are designed with low CPU and high GPU in mind. I mean, just look at PS4, with only about a third of Switch 2's CPU power, yet somehow ran Cyberpunk at 30 FPS. Pretty crazy.
Look at what I meant about the single CPU as well. Look at Liverpool versus Tegra X1. And the Tegra X1 is at 1 gigahertz. Why is it so close to this at 1.6 gigahertz and it has 8 cores versus 4? This is what I mean when I said even at the time, Tegra X1 was ahead of the game. It was literally the most powerful SoC on the planet at the time when it was revealed, and it wasn't outdone until Apple did it. They're a $1 trillion company, so of course they were able to do it when the Apple A9 or whatever it was came out that bested this chip. But like, look at this here, and how they try to focus on, hey, we got 8 cores and all this or whatever, but each core is extremely weak compared to this platform right here that literally sips power by comparison. And of course, yeah, you catch up on the multi-core, but not that much. You have an increased clock speed here, and you have twice the amount of cores. Technically, almost 3 times the amount of cores, because only 3 are available for Switch, and up to 7 are available on the PS4 for developers. And all you got was 990 out of it multi-core versus 481. I really want people to like start seeing this for what it is, because if you take this as synthetically being truthful, if you make this synthetically truthful and then you apply, hey, developer experience and the fact that, hey, you know, all these drivers and stuff like that, smaller file sizes, all those things are happening to make things significantly better than what you expect on paper. Because what should happen here is no game should be possible that's on the PS4 on Switch. Yet here we sit with plenty of PS4 games on Switch. Plenty of them. So we already know what's going to happen between this and this guy. So between PS5 and Switch 2, they're going to share a lot of games. So
easy, right? Anyway, I guess you might got a better understanding of Switch 2's hardware specs and performance. We are getting busy like hell since we accidentally found this motherboard, and I hope you found this video informative. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comment below if you will. And
all right, so that's going to be about it. So I'll go ahead and give y'all my my final thoughts on this. Effectively, what's going on here is we have a SoC that nobody was ready for. This system is extremely capable to the point where people have to come up with some type of weird narrative for it. And what I would suggest for the fake tech heads out there is to kind of grin and bear it, because it's coming. All the games are coming. The comparisons that were done were unfair, but to a fault, because they made the low-end PCs look really bad, and they made medium PCs look really bad, and talk about how segmentation and unoptimization is so bad on that platform. And all that's going to happen is you're going to see anywhere between 2 to 3x the performance for something that is optimized for and is technically on paper significantly weaker than that. But when you're targeting a certain resolution all the time, when you're targeting, you know, certain mega transfers per second all the time, when you have a certain clock speed all the time, and if you don't, you have, you know, just one of 2 different targets that you'll have. You'll have handheld or you'll have docked, and that'll be that. You have as a developer, you know what your target is, and you don't really have to sacrifice too much at this point, because resolution number 1 is automatically going to give you the performance that you need, since it's going to be significantly lower than that. I don't see too many developers targeting directly for 4K on this platform. That's pretty much just going to be Nintendo, because Nintendo does, you know, their they don't do AA that much in their games, so they're just going to draw their games or whatever in native 4K or native 1440p or whatever, and then upscale and go from there. I don't see too many third-party projects doing this unless they're indies. They're mostly going to be ports from PC and PS5, and they'll be 1080p, maybe 1440p if we're lucky at this point. But the games are going to look really similar. So I would say at this point, if you're holding out on whether or not to get a Switch 2 based on this information, if you will, I would say just look at the games. Look at the games that were announced. Look at what was there, and compare it to a PS5 version that you see right now. If you don't see that big of a difference, then that tells you everything you need to know. In my humble opinion, with regards to how the technology is, it's wondrous. I mean, obviously there could be more to be done. I'm wondering if there's Blackwell shader logic inside of this. Probably not, because we're talking 2023, 2024 tech at that point. But if it was there, or if it could be updated in firmware, that would be great. I don't really see that happening, but it could. You never know. Nintendo has all kind of power. So I will say that going forward, once we see these impossible ports or whatever, we're going to get all kind of excuses from the people of the industry to try to come up with a way to steal other than Nintendo platform. They're going to say, well, for the Switch 2, it's a really good game, or and all that kind of stuff, instead of just saying it's a good game or it's a really good effort port, like they do for other platforms. It is going to be a thing. It just expect that. Expect the bumps and bruises. Just enjoy your games and keep it moving. I'll definitely have one day one. I'll probably review it. There won't be much of a technical review, because just like this guy did, they did die scans and they still don't know anything. So it's really no point in trying to go back and forth on that. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I got to say about that. And I would say, if you see these screenshots being used in the wild, ask them where they got it from for one, because they got it from here. They're going to pretend they didn't, but they got it from this video, which is funny, because the first time I saw somebody else show this video, it wasn't even in English, and I guess they had time to repost it in English by the time I saw it. So I went ahead and captured it so I could do this. But look at the things that they try to spread online when they start talking about memory bandwidth, when they start talking about the GPU clock speeds and stuff like that. They're going to go back to the rumors, because there are no confirmed clock speeds yet. They're going to talk about the cores and then talk about, hey, what the PS5 has and all that. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, why am I seeing these two side by side looking the same? And then just go from there. Do you play games to have fun or to impress other people?